Hello aspirants, welcome back to Daily Current Affairs Analysis by Civic Center IAS, where we break down the most relevant and high impact topics from the UPSC CSE prelims perspective using the reverse engineering technique, which is one of the core approach of Civic Center IAS, where we analyze previous year questions to identify the trends and also predict the potential areas of focus. Displayed below are the key topics which we'll be covering today. Well, let's begin. The first article says that India and China have worked hard to preserve the G20 organization, said the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar on Friday during the talks with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, in this context, it is important to know about G20 for the prelims. Now, what is G20? See, as the name tells, it is a group of 20, that is, group of 20 countries. Now, it was established in the year 1999 following the Asian financial crisis. Initially, it was focused on economic and financial issues, aiming to provide the stability and cooperation in the global economy. However, over the time, its role has been expanded, making it the premier forum for the international economic cooperation. Now, see, what sets this G20 apart? It is that its rotating presidency, which ensures diverse leadership and inclusive decision making, and also it represents 85% of global GDP, over 75% of global trade, and also about 2/3 of the world's population. Now, let's take a closer look at its membership. See, as the name suggests, as we already discussed, it is group of 20 countries. So, G20 comprises 19 countries and 2 regional bodies. Now, if we see briefly, see, it has all the G7 countries, which are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, UK and US. Along with this, when Russia is added, it makes G8 countries. And the other countries like Argentina, Australia, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey. These completes the other 19 countries. And now, in addition to these, the 2 regional groups are the European Union and also newly included African Union. Now, if you see furthermore, one of the most interesting aspects of G20 is its presidency and Troika system. Unlike other international organizations, the G20 doesn't have a permanent secretariat. Instead, the presidency rotates annually among the member countries, right? And now, it also maintains the continuity. That means the presidency is supported by the Troika, which comprises the previous, current and incoming presidency. Now, this year, the G20 Troika includes Brazil as the previous G20 president. That is, in 2024, Brazil has gained the presidentship. And now, 2025, that is the current G20 president is the South Africa. Remember this, current president is South Africa. And the United States as the incoming G20 president, that is in the year 2026. Well, okay. Now, how does this G20 actually function? See, it operates through a working mechanism divided into 2 main tracks. First is the finance track and other is the Sherpa track. So this finance track is led by the finance ministers and the central bank governors, focusing on the economic issues, fiscal policies and also the financial regulations. And this track ensures that G20 stays aligned with the global financial system. Meanwhile, the Sherpa track, which is led by the Sherpas, who were personal representatives of G20 leaders, they coordinate discussions on political, economic and social issues, ensuring that all aspects of global governance are addressed. And to make the discussions more comprehensive, like the G20 also includes working groups, and these groups addresses the thematic issues such as climate change, health, digital economy and development goals. So, by involving experts and stakeholders from member countries, these working groups provide the valuable insights and recommendations that shape the global policies. So, in conclusion, India and China, as 2 of the most influential members of the G20, they have played a crucial role in preserving the relevance and effectiveness of this organization, and their cooperation is not only a testament to the importance they play on international economic cooperation, but also an indication of the strategic diplomacy that underpins the global governance today. Now, let's see the UPSC previous year question. It says, in which one of the following groups are all the 4 country members of G20? Let's see the options. So, okay, as we discussed earlier about the 19 member countries, with that knowledge, let's answer. The first option set has Argentina, Mexico, South Africa and Turkey. Yes, these are all G20 countries. Okay, now let's see the other options too. If we see the second option, it says Australia. Yes, it is part of G20. Canada, yes. But see here, Malaysia and New Zealand are not part of G20, right? Now, let's see the third option. Brazil, yes. Iran, no. So, Saudi Arabia, yes. And Vietnam, no. So, this is also not the correct answer. Now, if we come to the fourth option, Indonesia, yes. Japan, yes, it is part of G20. But Singapore is not part of G20. And also South Korea is part of G20. So, the answer is first option. Now, if we see one more question, it says, with reference to the G20 common framework, consider the following statements. And the statements are, it is an initiative endorsed by G20 together with the Paris Club. And the second is, it is an initiative to support low-income countries with unsustainable debt. Now, it is asking us which of the statements given above is or are correct. Let's identify the correct statements. So, if we see, the G20 Common Framework is an initiative endorsed by the G20 in collaboration with the Paris Club, which is a group of creditors nations. And this Paris Club plays a crucial role in coordinating debt relief among the creditor countries. And this framework was established to address the debt vulnerabilities in low-income countries by coordinating the debt treatments. So, first statement is correct. Now, if we see the second statement, it is an initiative to support low-income countries with unsustainable debt. Yes, it is. See, as a G20 common framework aims to support low-income countries facing unsustainable debt burdens. And it also provides debt restructuring and relief to ensure the debt sustainability and to help these countries recover from economic challenges, including the impact of COVID-19. So, statement 2 is also correct, and the correct option here is both 1 and 2. Now, moving to the second article, it says that following the cabinet approval for a 16,300 crore national critical mineral mission in January, India plans to auction more mines by the year 2031, said the Union Minister of States for Mines and Minerals, Satish Chandra Dubey. Now, in this context, let's know briefly about the National Critical Minerals Mission, which is important for prelims. Okay, see, this mission was launched by Government of India, which significantly aims to reduce the import dependence on critical minerals and also boost the domestic exploration and also support the green energy transition. So, to achieve this, the mission has outlined several key objectives and features. Firstly, it focuses on domestic exploration, intending to intensify mineral exploration within India and in also the offshore areas. Right? And now, this machine particularly targets minerals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel and rare earth elements, which are essential for advanced technologies. If you see, for an example, the Geological Survey of India is actively exploring the lithium reserves in Jammu and Kashmir, which is a move that could significantly boost the India's energy independence. And now, in addition to this, if you see the domestic exploration, the mission also prioritizes reducing the import dependency. So, currently India relies heavily on imports for the electric vehicles, right? And also for batteries and renewable energy technologies. So, to address this, the government introduced customs duty waivers on critical minerals in the Union Budget 2024-2025, encouraging the local manufacturing and reducing import cost. Moreover, the machine emphasizes processing and recycling to ensure the sustainable resource utilization. And also, it also aims to develop the mineral processing parks and recycling technologies that will promoting a circular economy. Now, for example, see, recycling of lithium-ion batteries to recover the lithium and cobalt, which can be reused in EVs, reducing environmental impact. Now, additionally, if we see, it also secures the supply chains. The mission encourages overseas acquisitions. So, see, by acquiring these mineral assets abroad, India aims to reduce its dependency on global supply chains. For this, an example is that Kabil, which is a joint venture by Ministry of Mines, which recently acquired lithium reserves in Argentina, ensuring a steady supply for EV battery production in India. So, to facilitate these initiatives, the mission also focuses on regulatory and financial support. Significantly, it also aims to fast track the regulatory approvals and offer the financial incentives for the mineral exploration and development. And also, a significant reform supporting this is the amendment to the Mines and Minerals Act 1957, which expedites the mineral block auctions and attracts the private investments too. Remember, it is the taking up the private investments also. But now, see, why are these minerals so crucial for us? Okay. See, the critical minerals are essential for the economic development and the national security, but vulnerable to the supply chain disruptions. And also, they play a vital role in advanced technologies and also the green energy solutions. For example, see, in clean technologies, minerals like cadmium, cobalt, gallium, indium, selenium, and vanadium are indispensable for the zero emission vehicles and also wind turbines and solar panels. And meanwhile, see, in advanced manufacturing and defense, minerals such as beryllium, titanium, tungsten, and tantalum are used for the defense applications, permanent magnets, and also the ceramics. Additionally, the platinum group metals are also essential for the medical devices, cancer drugs, and also the dental materials, highlighting their importance in medical and high-tech industries. Now further, know that India has identified 30 critical minerals essential for its economic growth and strategic security. Some of them include antimony, beryllium, cobalt, copper, graphite, lithium, molybdenum, nickel, and also the platinum group elements, phosphorus, potash, rare earth elements are also covered. Remember this, silicon, tin, titanium, tungsten, etc. So, recognizing the importance of securing these minerals, India is also a member of the Mineral Security Partnership, which is an international initiative designed to catalyze the public and private investment in critical mineral supply chains. And further, this Mineral Security Partnership consists 23 global partners, including Argentina, Australia, Canada, European Union, India, Japan, South Korea, UK, and USA, and many others. And this partnership is strategically significant for India, enhancing the international alliances and also ensuring the resource security. Now, in this context, let's see a UPSC previous year question. And the question is, with reference to the management of minor minerals in India, consider the following statements. So, first statement is, sand is a minor mineral according to the prevailing law in the country. Yes, sand is classified as a minor mineral under the Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act of 1957. So, according to this act, other minor minerals include building stones, gravel, ordinary clay, ordinary sand also, and other minerals used in the construction field. Right, now the second statement is that state governments have the power to grant mining leases of minor minerals, but the powers regarding the formation of rules related to the grant of minor minerals lie with the central government. Okay, let's look at this statement. The first part of the statement, that is, state governments have the exclusive power to grant mining leases and frame rules regulated to grant of minor minerals. Yes, this part is correct, but here it is mentioned, but it is also saying the powers regarding the formation of rules regulated to the grant of minor minerals lies with the central government. No, it is wrong. It lies with the state government, not the central government. So the statement is wrong. Now, the third statement says that state governments have the power to frame rules to prevent illegal mining of minor minerals. Yes, this is correct. State governments will be having the authority to frame the rules to prevent the illegal mining, transportation, and also storage of minor minerals. So it is asking to identify the correct statements. 1 and 3 are correct. So the first option is correct. Now, moving to the next article, it says that 5 more cheetahs were released into the wild from their enclosures at Madhya Pradesh Kuno National Park on Friday, taking the total number of big cats set free to 12. Now, in this context, it is important to know about Kuno National Park, and as a value addition, let's see about the Project Cheetah. Firstly, talking about the Kuno National Park, it is strategically located in the Shiopur district of Madhya Pradesh, which is nestled near the Vindhyan Hills, providing an ideal habitat for the cheetahs. Right? See now, here the interesting thing is that the name of Kuno National Parks comes after the Kuno River, which is one of the main tributaries of the Chambal River. And also, this Kuno was originally established as a wildlife sanctuary, but its status was upgraded to a national park in the year 2018. And this area was specifically selected under the Action Plan for Introduction of Cheetah in India, as it was deemed to have a habitat parallel to the Masai Mara National Park in Kenya. Remember, Masai Mara National Park in Kenya, known for its vast grasslands suitable for the cheetahs. Now, if you look at the landscape of Kuno National Park, see, it is predominantly grassland, right? Remember, it is predominantly grassland with a few rocky outcrops adding diversity to the terrain. Further, its flora is characterized by the Kardai, Kair, and Salai trees, which dominate the forested areas of Kuno, creating a mixed forest ecosystem. And now, if we see its fauna, it consists of jungle cat, Indian leopard, sloth bear, Indian wolf, striped hyena, golden jackal, Bengal fox, and dhole, along with some other species, etc. So now, if you look at the cheetah reintroduction project in India, see, it is formally commenced on September 17th of 2022 with the primary goal of restoring the population of cheetahs that were declared extinct in the country in the year 1952. So, remember here, cheetahs were declared extinct in India in the year 1952. And this cheetah reintroduction project involves a translocation of cheetahs from South Africa and Namibia to Kuno National Park. So, it is implemented by the National Tiger Conservation Authority in collaboration with the Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, Wildlife Institute of India, and also cheetah experts from Namibia and South Africa. Now, to your information, the other tiger reserves in Madhya Pradesh are Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve, Kanha Tiger Reserve, Panna Tiger Reserve, Pench Tiger Reserve, Sanjay Dubri Tiger Reserve, Satpura Tiger Reserve, and also the Viranga Durgavati Tiger Reserve. Right? See, remember these places, it can be asked in the exam. Now, moving to the next article, it says that in a historic move, India assumed chairmanship of Bay of Bengal Intergovernmental Organization from Bangladesh at the 13th Governing Council meeting at Malé, Maldives today, in the presence of senior government representatives from Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Bangladesh. So now, here the focus area is Bay of Bengal Intergovernmental Organization. Let us briefly know about it. Now, this organization was established in the year 2003 as a regional fisheries body where the organization aims to improve the quality of life for fisher folk by implementing the sustainable development practices and also fostering the international cooperation. Now, historically, this organization is evolved from the Bay of Bengal Program of Food and Agriculture Organization, which was initially founded in the year 1979. And remember, the members currently comprises 4 member countries, namely Bangladesh, India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka, along with cooperating non-contracting parties including Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. So, in conclusion, the core objectives of this organization includes sustainable development and management of coastal fisheries, capacity building and skill development, and also shared learning and information exchange, along with the transfer of knowledge and appropriate technologies and research and strategic planning. And these objectives works together to promote sustainable fisheries management and also enhance the quality of life for small scale and artisanal fisher folks in Bay of Bengal region. Now, moving ahead, the next article says that Ministry of Mines White Gazette notification dated 20th February 2025 has shifted minerals like barytes, feldsar, mica, and quartz from list of minor minerals to category of major minerals. So remember this, India has taken a significant step towards enhancing its strategic mineral resources by reclassifying barytes, feldspar, mica, and quartz from minor minerals to major minerals. Remember this? Okay, so this change was implemented to enhance the exploration and scientific mining given their association with critical minerals essential for the modern industries. And this reclassification follows the approval of the National Critical Mineral Mission on January 29, 2025, reflecting the India's commitment to securing its critical mineral supply chain and also boosting its strategic resources. But why was this change necessary and what does it mean for India's economy and technological growth? Let's discuss briefly. See, the significance of this reclassification lies in the fact that quartz, feldspar, mica are commonly found in the pegmatite rocks, which are known to contain important critical minerals such as beryl, lithium, niobium, tantalum, molybdenum, tin, titanium, and tungsten. Remember, these are all the critical minerals, right? Okay, so now these minerals are not only vital for the modern technology but also holds a strategic importance in the India's economic growth. Now, on the other hand, if we take barite is associated with ores of antimony, cobalt, copper, lead, manganese and silver, making it an essential raw material for various high-tech industries. Also, this rich association with critical minerals makes them extremely valuable for advanced manufacturing and strategic industries. Now, moreover, these minerals have immense industrial and strategic importance, like quartz, feldspar, and mica also plays a crucial role in the energy transition and also new technologies, spacecraft industries, and also in the healthcare sector. Now, their application in the development of advanced electronics and renewable energy solutions makes them indispensable for India's technological growth. Now, meanwhile, the barite, which is now shifted to the major mineral, it is widely used in oil and also the gas drilling, electronics, TV screens, radiation shielding, and medical applications. Now, if you see, for example, you can see this barite, it is used in high density concrete to block the X-ray emissions in the hospitals, power plants, and also in laboratories, ensuring the safety and efficiency in these sensitive environments. But, however, one of the main reasons for this reclassification was to address the non-reporting and non-extraction issues. As if you see the leaseholders, they primarily use the quartz, feldspar, mica and barite for construction, glass and ceramic making, consequently making the critical minerals associated with them neither extracted nor reported, leading to the significant loss of the valuable resources. So now, by reclassifying them as the major minerals, the government aims to scientifically extract and report critical minerals linked with these resources, ensuring systematic mining and maximum utilization. And this move aligns with the objectives of National Critical Mineral Mission, which focuses on reducing the import dependence and enhancing domestic exploration of critical minerals. Now, as a value addition, let's know the classification of major and minor minerals under the Indian law. Remember, this is important for your prelims. See, the major minerals are those with economic importance and strategic value regulated under the Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act 1957, in short, MMDR Act. And these minerals require detailed exploration, scientific mining and are subject to the central government regulation. For example, in context of India, metallic minerals such as iron ore and manganese are classified as ferrous minerals, while copper, bauxite, lead and zinc are considered as non-ferrous minerals. Now, what is this ferrous and non-ferrous? See, it is simple. Ferrous minerals means it is having iron in that. Non-ferrous means it is not having iron. And energy minerals like coal, petroleum, natural gas, uranium and thorium are crucial for India's energy security. Now further, if we take the precious minerals including year gold, diamond and platinum are valued for their rarity and also the economic significance. Meanwhile, critical minerals like lithium, cobalt and rare earth elements are also essential for the advanced electronics, renewable energy and defense applications. Now, these all comes under your major minerals. Now, on the other hand, if we see the minor minerals, they are important but with low economic value, primarily used for construction and local industries. And these minerals are regulated by the state governments under Section 15 of MMDR Act 1957, allowing the states to frame the rules for the regulation and extraction and also the utilization. Now, if we see some of the examples of minor minerals, they include like sand, gravel, granite and marble, clay, and also some of the industrial minerals like silica sand, kaolin, bentonite all are also classified as your minor minerals. Now, in this regards, let's see one of the UPSC previous year question asked. Now, the question says, consider the following minerals, and the minerals are bentonite, chromite, kyanite, sillimanite. Now, it is asking us, in India, which of the above is or officially designated as major minerals. So, from this you have to identify what are the major minerals. Okay. If you see, as we discussed, bentonite is classified as minor mineral in India and it is regulated by the state governments. Now, we have chromite. Chromite is major mineral because of its economic importance and strategic value, and this major mineral is regulated by the central government under the MMDR Act. Okay. Now, if we see the kyanite, yes, it is also a major mineral, and sillimanite, it is also a major mineral which is used in refractory products, ceramics, and also high temperature furnaces. So, okay. So 2, 3 and 4 are major minerals. So option D is correct. Now moving to the next article, it says that a day after the newly formed Delhi cabinet approved the implementation of Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana in the capital, the National Health Authority has hit the ground running to roll out the scheme. Now in this context, let's talk about the Ayushman Bharat, which is in use many a times and there will be a scope to ask in the exam. So, let's talk about the scheme. Know that it is a flagship health scheme launched by the Government of India as recommended by the National Health Policy 2017. And its primary aim is to achieve universal health coverage, ensuring that every citizen has access to quality health care without the financial hardship. And this initiative is designed to meet the Sustainable Development Goals with the underlying commitment to leave no one behind. And also, the scheme adopts a continuum of care approach, which means it focuses on providing the comprehensive healthcare services throughout an individual's life. Now further, it consists of two key components. First is the health and wellness centers and the other is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Now, let's talk about them in detail. Firstly, talking about the health and wellness centers, it focuses on providing the preventive, promotive and primary healthcare services, ensuring that basic health services are accessible at the grassroots levels. Now, on the other hand, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is the largest health assurance scheme in the world, aiming to provide a health cover of Rs 5 lakhs per family per year for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization. And this scheme targets over 12 crore poor and vulnerable families. That means approximately 55 crore beneficiaries, representing the bottom 40% of Indian population. And now, if we see the eligibility criteria for PMJ, they are based on the deprivation and occupational categories identified in the Socio-Economic Caste Census 2011. And now see, it is for both rural and urban areas. That means it ensures that most needy and vulnerable families are also included. Now, here the important point noted that PMJ was earlier known as the National Health Protection Scheme. But now it is subsumed under the Rashtriya Swasthata Bima Yojana, which had been launched in the year 2008. Now, see this PMJ is fully funded by the government and cost of implementation is shared between the central and state governments, ensuring the comprehensive financial backing for the scheme. And it also offers coverage at both public and private empaneled hospitals across India, enhancing the accessibility and choice for the beneficiaries. And the scheme provides the comprehensive coverage including the pre-hospitalization expenses for up to 3 days and post-hospitalization expenses for up to 15 days, which cover diagnostics and also the medications. Additionally, there are no restrictions on family size, age or gender, ensuring that every eligible family member can benefit from the scheme. So, all the pre-existing conditions are covered from the day one itself, providing the complete health security. Moving to the next article, it says that after softening for 3 quarters in a row, the Composite Flash Purchasing Managers Index, that is in short PMI, rose at a faster pace in February, showing an uptick in the growth of private sector in the current quarter, says an HSBC report. Now, what exactly is this Purchasing Managers Index and why is it considered such a crucial indicator of economic health? Let's know that. See, the Purchasing Managers Index is essentially a survey based measure that accesses changes in the key business variables such as output, new orders, employment, and inventory levels compared to the previous month. So, it is designed to provide timely information about the current and future business conditions to a wide range of stakeholders, including the company decision makers, analysts, and also the inventors. And by analyzing these changes, the PMI helps the businesses and policymakers understand the overall economic climate and make informed decisions. Further, there are two main types of PMI. First is the manufacturing PMI and second is the services PMI, where the manufacturing PMI measures the performance of manufacturing sector, reflecting the changes in production, new orders, inventory levels, and also the supplier deliveries. Now, on the other hand, the services PMI evaluates the performance of the service sector, focusing on the business activity, new orders, employment, and input prices. Now, also, to provide a more comprehensive view of the economy, a composite PMI is constructed by combining the results of this both manufacturing and services PMI. So, this composite PMI serves as a leading indicator of overall economic activity, making it a valuable tool for economic forecasting. Now, if you see, this PMI is expressed as a number ranging from 0 to 100, with 50 being the pivotal point. A PMI above 50 indicates the expansion in the economic activity, suggesting that the business are experiencing the growth in demand and output. Now, conversely, a PMI below 50 denotes the contraction, indicating a decline in business activity. And a reading at 50 indicates that there is no change from the previous month. Now, interestingly, if the PMI of the previous month is higher than the PMI of the current month, it suggests that the economy is contracting, reflecting a slowdown in the growth momentum. Therefore, the tracking of PMI trends helps businesses and investors anticipate the changes in the economy and adjust their strategies accordingly. Now, further, if we see, the PMI is compiled by the IHS Markit, which is a global leader in information, analytics, and also solutions for major industries and markets that drive the economies worldwide. And this IHS Markit conducts survey across more than 40 economics globally, making its PMI data one of the most reliable indicators of the global economic performance. And in addition, this IHS Markit is part of S&P Global, further enhancing its credibility and reach in the field of economic research and analysis. Right? Okay, this is all about PMI, that is Purchasing Manufacturers Index. Now, if we see the last article of the day, it says that the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence has busted 7 facilities involved in printing of fake Indian currency notes, the Finance Ministry said. Now, in this context, let's talk about the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which operates under the Central Board of Indirect Tax and Customs, which is a part of Ministry of Finance, Government of India. So, as a central agency, it is responsible for preventing smuggling and serves as a critical line of defense against the illegal trade activities. Let's look at the key responsibilities of DRI. See, primarily, the agency is actively involved in identifying and intercepting the smuggling activities across India's vast borders. So, from land borders to coastal areas, this DRI maintains a vigilant watch preventing the illegal movement of contraband goods. And this includes combating the smuggling of items such as drugs, wildlife, gold, foreign currency, and environmentally sensitive goods. Now, in addition to the anti-smuggling efforts, the DRI is also a critical agency for combating the drug trafficking. India's strategic location makes it vulnerable to drug trafficking routes, particularly from the Golden Crescent, which includes the Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Remember, the Golden Crescent means Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, whereas the Golden Triangle means Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand. So, recognizing the threat from these countries, the DRI actively intercepts the illegal drug trade in and out of India, preventing the inflows of narcotics and psychotropic substances. Moreover, the DRI is committed to the protection of national resources, particularly in preventing the illicit international trade of endangered wildlife and environmentally sensitive goods. For example, DRI intercepts the illegal trade of endangered species listed under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, that is your CITES, and this includes the smuggling of tiger skins, ivory, exotic birds, and medicinal plants. Additionally, the agency also prevents the export and import of environmentally hazardous materials, thereby contributing to environmental conservation and sustainability. Now, apart from these roles, DRI also plays a significant role in combating commercial frauds related to the international trade. With globalization and increasing the international trade, there has been a rise in commercial frauds also, such as undervaluation, overvaluation, and misuse of export incentives. So, to counter these, DRI monitors the international trade transactions and investigates fraudulent activities to protect the government revenue and maintain fair trade practices. Furthermore, DRI actively combats the evasion of customs duty by identifying and preventing the fraudulent trade practices. And also, the customs duty evasion not only leads to the revenue loss for the government but also encourages unfair competition in the market. So, to tackle this, the DRI monitors imports and exports, verifies the authenticity of the trade documents, and conducts investigations to detect the under invoicing, misdeclaration of goods, and also misuse of duty exemptions. By doing so, the DRI ensures compliance with customs regulations and safeguards the government revenue. So that is all about DRI. And with this, we conclude today's current affairs analysis and we'll be back with another video. Thank you.